How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Alloved's guide series on Curse of Strahd. In this video we will be going over Chapter 2, the Lands of Barovia. In this video we'll be going over all the lands that you're going to be going around, all the possible things that aren't included in other chapters, and all the random encounters and all the fun rollable tables. But before I go into any major names or spoilers, I'm of course going to warn you that there is spoilers. So people that actually plan on playing on this module and don't want to get spoiled or ruined, I would suggest that you kindly and politely back off and let your DMs go ahead and handle this one. Alright, now that the players are gone, let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 2 takes us into the Lands of Barovia, and it's here where we get some really good information on the denizens of Barovia, the Barovians. We get some really good info on how to roleplay them. We get some really good info on what we can use for names, what they do on a day-to-day basis, and how they just function in this weird, messed up little society. We, of course, get information on the Vistani as well, regulars to these Barovian lands, and we also get really good information on a whole bunch of areas in the Lands of Barovia that are not covered in all of the other chapters, for example being the Tser Falls Encampment. I could go on all day talking about these locations, but let's go ahead and dive on into the map because, man, I love this map. And would you look at that? This is our play area. This is what we are working with, the Lands of Barovia. Love this map. I love this area. It feels so real. It feels so lived in. It feels like this is a location where people would go ahead and settle down because it's located near rivers and lakes and forests and mountains. It's very scenic, and at one point was probably very peaceful and, beautiful. But the issue was, of course, with time, there was a battle, and of course, after Strahd took over the place and shut this place down, it's kind of not doing so hot. So while we do have this incredibly large map, realistically, your players aren't going to go around to every little hex of it. This is not a hex crawler. This is not a, oh hey, you gotta go 40 miles out into the woods that way kind of game. No, this is more of a game where your players are going to be interacting with the towns and the peoples and rarely straying off of the main path. Of course, entirely your prerogative, you can go ahead and add whatever you want to this area, but basically, you can see these topographical lines here that show off these mountains, and these mountains are pretty hard to traverse. These hills are hard to traverse. And of course, these forests are deadly. When your players go ahead and try to make their way through all these Svalich Woods, they're going to be in for a terrible time because they are plagued with monsters and who knows what else. And as we can see here in the intro to Chapter 2, native Barovians have been terrorized for hundreds of years, and they reside within their walls because, of course, why would they want to go out? All they hear about people going outside is death and destruction. The people of Vallaki, they stay inside all day and have their walls. That's great. The people of Kresk, they sit inside and they have their walls. That's great. The people of the village of Barovia, they don't have walls, but every single night at midnight, they see a march of the damned adventurers that have been killed by Strahd, and they know that all these hundreds, if not thousands of adventurers couldn't kill Strahd. Man, their lives are just going to be miserable. But we do get some information here on the Keepers of the Feather. These characters will play a bit more into the Vallaki chapter and the Wizard of Wines chapter. But essentially, they are a group of were-ravens that are opposing Strahd. They are not powerful enough to defeat Strahd on their own, so they are going to try and wrangle up some adventurers and hopefully goad them into saving the day. For lay of the land here, we get some really awesome information on how to describe the scenery around them. Rolling thunderclouds cast a gray pall over the land of Barovia. A deathly stillness hangs over the dark woods, which are patrolled constantly by Strahd's wolves and other servitors. And you can go into immense detail about the Svalich Woods and the lakes and all these locations, and it just feels so real and it feels so alive. We also get information on the mist of Ravenloft, this deadly fog that surrounds all Barovia and stops anyone from leaving. If anybody tries to go ahead and make their way through the fog, then they will succumb to exhaustion. A creature that starts to turn in the fog must succeed on a DC 20 con saving throw or gain 1 level of exhaustion. This exhaustion can't be removed until they leave the fog. No matter how far a creature travels in the fog or which direction it goes, it gets turned around so that it eventually finds itself back in Barovia. And the area within the fog is heavily obscured. So people that are trying to just run out of the mist, they get lost, they're blinded, and they will start to die because in 5th edition, exhaustion is incredibly bad. When you hit 1, whatever, disadvantage on ability checks, whatever. But you eventually tailor that all the way up to 6 and you die. And what it's saying right here is in the span of 6 whole rounds, you could die. And it's more than likely that you will die in 6 rounds because DC 20 con saving throw is kind of hard. So people that try and exit out of the mist find themselves back where they started and exhausted, and people that go into the mist never return if they stay there out there too long because they just drop dead. And lastly here we have sunlight in Barovia. Sunlight does not really function around here. The rolling gray clouds that persist above don't really permit sunlight from stretching upon this vampiric land. Every once in a while, sunlight does break through and give people just a glimmer of hope, but more often than not, Barovian days are just muted gray. The land is considered bright light for the purposes of mechanics, but mind you that it would be a little bit darker than normal. It would just always be essentially an overcast. And what's really important about this is it does allow for vampires to walk around during the day. And this can be a totally awesome reveal at some point in the campaign. Your players meet with someone who they know is a vampire, and the vampires always attack at night because that's what vampires do. And maybe they're fighting all night long and the sun's about to rise and they know for a fact that the vampires will run away. And when the sun starts to bleat down onto the clouds, giving everyone just a little bit more light, the vampires don't run. And that is going to be terrifying. The information found here on Lay of the Land is something you should always keep into consideration. The lack of direct sunlight, the mist that are ever present, and just the muted areas that your players will constantly go and find. For alterations to magic here, we have some pretty significant changes. No spell, not even a wish, allows one to escape Strahd's domain. This is definitely a holdover from the older editions of Ravenloft and all of the Domains of Dread. Once you find yourself in a Domain of Dread, it is way hard to go ahead and make your way out. Astral Projection, Teleport, Plane Shift, and any other spell of the similar nature cast with the intent on leaving Barovia simply fails. This land is locked away from the rest of the worlds. This place is considered its own plane. So if you have spells that let you contact people on the same plane of existence, lo and behold, you will not be able to contact them. And last and most important of all here, if anybody tries to contact another worldly being, whether it be their deity that they are devoted to, their warlock patron, which they are trying to hear muted whispers from, or just some other type of entity out there, if anybody ever tries to contact any of these beings, Strahd will go ahead and receive the call, and he can decide to go ahead and impersonate whoever this is. He could try and impersonate whoever this deity is, or he could just go ahead and let split the whole thing that he is in on the call, and that is also very terrifying. If you have a character who is religious and always devotes themselves to their god, and they lose contact with their god, that's a pretty significant deal. If you have a warlock whose patron is whispering them to do certain things, and it turns out it's been Strahd telling them to do these things all this time, that's an amazing revelation. There's so many great things you can do with that, and it really sets in the fact that this place is truly locked away, and you are sadly alone. For cosmetic spell modifications here, we get a big old nice list of spells which are changed. Mind you, they don't mechanically change. It simply states here, for example, Find Familiar. The familiar is undead, not celestial, fey, or fiend, and is immune to features that turn undead. Gust of Wind. A ghastly moan accompanies the summoned wind. And Spirit Guardians. The spirits appear as ghostly skeletal warriors. These things are purely flavor, and of course don't do anything mechanically to change the game, but they might have roleplay implications. A perfect example of this being Rary's telepathic bond. Characters linked together by the spell can't shake the feeling that something vile is telepathically eavesdropping on them. You tell them this, that, oh, you feel like someone's eavesdropping on you, and that might say to them, oh, hey, maybe we shouldn't cast this spell. Maybe that's not worth it if someone's constantly like listening in on us. Another perfect example is Mage Hand. The summoned hand is skeletal. So the people of Barovia don't interact with magic too much. They don't have any actual major spellcasters to that degree. So if you have someone going around casting around a skeletal hand everywhere, they're probably going to freak out. They're probably going to shun whoever's making some skeletal hand fly around all over the place. That is kind of creepy. So while yes, there is no mechanical changes to these cosmetic spell modifications, Always keep into consideration the roleplay aspect. And lastly, here we have Resurrection Madness. In Barovia, the souls of the dead are trapped as the souls of the living. If you are dead for 24 hours and brought back to life, you will find yourself indefinitely mad. You will go insane, and thus you will roll on the indefinite madness table. So as we can see here, the alterations of magic have some implications to them. You can't leave this place. Some of these spells might get you into trouble, and if you're dead for too long, you'll go insane. There's a lot of fun things you can do with all these alterations to magic. Next up for chapter 2 here, we have Barovians. As we can tell here, these people look absolutely delightful, don't they? They look like an absolutely cheery bunch. When Strahd and his army occupied the lands, they slew all of its original inhabitants, and he repopulated the area with his own people from other conquered lands. That means the people that are around here have different backgrounds, which is pretty cool. Mind you though, while these people may have different backgrounds, they all have kind of homogenized themselves into this area because they've been pretty much living on top of each other for hundreds of years, haven't had really too much outside input. And also very interesting is the fact that there's only humans. Barovians are only humans. There is no dwarves and halflings and elves running around this place. Well, we'll be getting to elves in a moment here. But for the most part, Barovians are in fact only humans. And that is going to have, once again, more roleplay elements, because if your players arrive here and you have a whole bunch of people that are not human, then the Barovians are going to look at them sort of distrustingly. They are an odd bunch, especially if you have people that look a little bit more scary, like if you have tieflings, or maybe you have Goliaths or Minotaurs or that nature. So as you can read here, the Barovians are just an unhappy people. They are not having a great time. Their lives are miserable. They're constantly living in fear. There is just nothing they can do to change their lives. And they will go ahead and take it out on anybody that is not one of them. If your players arrive and try and shake up the boat here, they're going to not want any of that because their lives are already bad enough. What if these guys go ahead and make it worse? We actually do get a number here. It states that there is less than 3,000 people living in the valley. And this is something that a lot of DMs talk about in regards of what are the exact numbers of who lives where and what does what, because we don't get exact numbers of anyone living in any town. We don't get exact numbers of how many there are of anybody really, which is perfectly fine. You can leave that totally vague. But if you want to make sure that there is definitely a solid number listed somewhere, you can just, without a shadow of a doubt, say, oh, there's less than 3,000 people living around here. And you can go ahead and divvy up that number between all of the various settlements. And here in Souls and Shells, we get the actual number on how many people have souls. So Barovians that don't have souls, which is the majority of them, are just plain and drab and don't do much, and their lives are miserable, and really they don't change anything about their lives. However, 1 in 10 Barovians does indeed have a soul. And the people that have souls are a little bit more animated. They're a little bit more colorful. And they go ahead and bring some life into the world and, more importantly, into your campaign. Strahd, being a vampire, does need to drink blood every once in a while. But the funny thing is he can't drink the blood of the soulless. There is no life to them, and thus he doesn't get actual nourishment. So he does actually need to go out and find people with souls and drink their blood. The thing about this, though, is Strahd actually can just tell at a glance if someone has a soul or not. So that is easy for him to just go ahead and look around and say, oh, hey, you got a soul? You know, snack time. And we get a little bit of insight into the finale here. If Strahd is defeated, the fog that surrounds Barovia fades away, allowing the inhabitants of the valley to leave if they wish. Only those who have souls, however, can truly leave this place. Soulless Barovians cease to exist as soon as they exit the valley. Which is kind of sad in a way, like, you know, they're, even though they are soulless, they are still people. But you can definitely have that conversation of what it means to be alive, and what is the soul, and what is the self. You can have these conversations, but unfortunately you're going to have to wait a long time to have these conversations, because that is pretty much when the campaign wraps up. We get some really good information on Barovian names here. Instead of having to come up with some random name on the spot, you can just go ahead and write down a couple of these, and these will work wonders for any random Barovian that your players will come across. Like good old Laszlo Aranovich, you know, just a very easy name and very cool to come up with at any given time. So with Barovians and non-humans, once again, the Barovians see creatures that aren't humans as a little bit weird. Aside from the secretive Dusk Elves found near Vallaki, the only non-humans Barovians interact with are the adventurers that occasionally show up to Strahd's domain. And that definitely makes sense that they don't like these people, because I'm sure all these adventurers show up to these lands and they go ahead and say, oh, we're going to get out of here. Oh, we're going to destroy Strahd. We're going to make this land great. And then all of a sudden they die and they join that parade of the dead. And I'm sure the Barovians have seen this time and time and time again. And of course, there's probably been good, nice adventurers that have shown up here and done good things. But I'm sure there's plenty of bad adventurers that show up and just start mucking up the place. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of scumbags out there that start bullying people and using their powers to their own benefits and so on and so forth. So it makes sense that outsiders are scorned, feared, or shunned. Why wouldn't they be? For hundreds of years, every once in a while, someone shows up and they get themselves killed. And, you know, who cares about these people? And one thing I really love here is the Barovian lore. We get information that Barovians would go ahead and tell the players if they went and asked. We get some good information on the Devil Strahd. Oh, Strahd von Zarovich is a vampire and he dwells in a castle Ravenloft. No one's welcome to the castle. A vampire can't enter a residence without an invitation from one of the occupants. Running water burns a vampire. We get some really good information that you can go ahead and exposition on your players. And more so, of course, is a way to get them to not metagame, because they, as players, probably already know that because we're well versed into vampire culture. But, you know, obviously not every person in the D&D universe would be. For the Lands of Barovia, we get information such as many strangers have been drawn to the Lands of Barovia over the years, but they all die or disappear before long. The town of Vallaki lies in the heart of the valley. Its burgomaster is named Baron Vargas Vlakovich. Wine is the lifeblood of Barovia. For some, it is the only reason to keep living. Barovian taverns get their wine from the Wizard of Wine's winery near Kresk. Definitely some good information there that you can go ahead and shove onto your players. Once again, making this place feel real, making it feel lived in, making it so that people understand what is going on in the world around them. And beliefs and superstitions, this is a big deal, especially if you have characters in your party that are religious, such as clerics and paladins. Two divine forces watch over the Barovian people, the Morning Lord and Mother Night. Spirits drift along the old Svalich Road toward the castle Ravenloft in the dead of night. These phantoms are all that remains of Strahd's enemies, and his damnable fate awaits anyone who opposes him. Never harm a raven, lest ill fortune befall you. All these things are just great because, of course, people that are locked inside their cities all day would grow superstitious. Why wouldn't they be? They hear all these terrible things, and I'm sure, of course, a lot of these things aren't real and aren't true, but they would believe it because they'd have no way to disprove it. And the stuff that is true and the stuff that they actually know, like, for example, the spirits drifting along the old Svalich Road, they would know these things because they see it. And you can go ahead and tell your players, oh, hey, don't be one of the many spirits that drift along the old Svalich Road. And when your players hear that, they'll probably think, oh, that's stupid. But if they actually stick around and see this parade of dead people, they're going to be like, oh, crap, that could be us. So really great information on the beliefs and superstition. And lastly, for the Barovians, we have the Barovian calendar. And the Barovians have their own way to tell time. But we get really good information here that probably should have been listed somewhere else, but it's good that we find it here. Strahd was born in 306. In 346, he inherited his father's crown, lands, and army. Strahd conquered the valley in 347, finished the construction of Castle Ravenloft in 350, and died and became a vampire in 351. The current year is 735. So we can see right here how long this guy's been in control of this land. But what's also very important is the fact that if you are keeping up with your time in your game, then if you're running it around the same time as all the other modules, specifically the 5th edition modules, then the year is around 1470 some odd. That is around the time that all these 5th edition modules are taking place. So if you're running it with the sense that, oh, they're around the same time, and they find themselves here, they're going to realize that they've sort of stepped back in time. Mind you, that's not going to be able to do anything with that information. They can't go ahead and, you know, spend it all on stocks or something because they're not in the same land. They have no idea where they are, and unfortunately, even if they do know that the year has changed, it doesn't really matter to them because to them, they're just stuck here. So review all that information on Barovians and make sure you play them up well, because if you play up the Barovians like they're just completely boring and empty and nothing, then your players aren't going to be too invested in trying to save them. And more so, if you play them too animated, then it's not going to feel real, because of course they're in this land that sucks, and it would make sense that a lot of people would be depressed. And mind you, if your players don't know about this whole soulless thing, then they might see that most people just have depression, which would be totally reasonable claim. Most people would be, of course, sad and miserable. But of course, once the whole soul aspect starts coming into play for your players, then they can go ahead and say, oh, hey, maybe all these people aren't as bad, and maybe if we saved them somehow and gave them souls, then they could, no longer be depressed and be free. And speaking of free people here, we have the Vistani, and these people are colorful, and these people are not depressed, and these people are happy. The Vistani are wanderers, and they move around civilizations, they travel around, they meet new people, they see new things, they do whatever it takes to survive, but they are a happy people. They wear bright clothes, they laugh often, and they drink heartily, and they're always welcoming of people that are welcoming of them. The Vistani are not one nation, they are not one group. They are many groups, and they move around. And while they might be friendly toward each other, of course, they might act a little bit differently. Some Vistani groups are going to be a little bit more hostile than others. Some Vistani groups are going to be more welcoming of others. Vistani are just like any other people in that regard. But of course, while Vistani are individuals, some of them have decided to play in with Strahd, because Strahd is a powerful individual, and under Strahd's protection, they can thrive. Because the Vistani protected Strahd oh so long ago, and Strahd provides protection to them now and allows them to leave these lands whenever they wish, some Vistani, take advantage of that, and they make money off of this, and they swindle people because of this. There is some things that some Vistani do to help their Dark Master. But of course, not all the Vistani play in with Strahd. Some of them are simply just using the protection he grants as is, and don't, harm anybody else. And it's here as well in Vistani lore, we get some good information in the world here, and specifically on Strahd von Zarovich. Strahd comes from a royal bloodline. He died centuries ago, yet endures as one of the undead, feasting on the blood of the living. Barovians refer to him as the Devil Strahd. Strahd named his castle Ravenloft after his beloved mother, Queen Ravonia. Strangers aren't welcome at the castle without an invitation. Selling this information to your players is fantastic. For the Lands of Barovia, Strahd conquered this land centuries ago and named it after his father, King Barov. Strahd uses wolves, bats, and other creatures to spy on all in this realm. And especially if you tell players stuff like that, then they're really going to be wary about the environment around them. Vistani have their own beliefs and their own superstitions, and they can go ahead and tell the players that Vistani curses are potent, but they are invoked with great caution. Vistani know to curse one who is undeserving of such punishment can have grave consequences for the one who utters such a curse. So you can definitely play into the fact that, oh hey, don't mess with the Vistani, or the Vistani are going to mess with you. And speaking of here, we have a whole lot of information on Vistani curses. If they see someone within 30 feet, they can utter a curse, and the Vistani can go ahead and do many different effects on this person. The curse can just be as simple as the target is unable to perform a certain kind of act involving fine motor control, such as tying knots, writing, playing an instrument, sewing, or casting spells that have somatic components. But, as we can see here, when this curse ends, that Vistani takes 1d6 psychic damage. But it can be so damning, it could be something as powerful as the target is blinded, deafened, or both. When the curse ends, the Vistani takes 5d6 psychic damage. So as we can see here, there's a huge list on what Vistani can actually do for curses, and they all are very thematic and very cool. But the thing is you have to take into consideration what Vistani is cursing who. Because a simple commoner isn't actually going to use any Vistani curse, because they know that that would possibly kill them. If they were a simple commoner that only had, let's say, like 3 HP, they could theoretically die if they take 1d6 psychic damage. But at the same time, Vistani that know that they're a little bit better, they know their limits. They might go ahead and do a curse that is a little bit more powerful, such as the target gains vulnerability to a damage type of the Vistani's choice. And when that one ends, they take 3d6 psychic damage. So a stronger Vistani who sees someone that's earned their ire, they can go ahead and give them a curse that is a little bit stronger. And the Vistani don't only have those curses, they also have the Evil Eye. As an action, the Vistani can target a creature within 10 feet, and whenever this kicks off, they are under the effect of Animal Friendship, Charm Person, or Hold Person. That is huge, because if you piss off a whole bunch of Vistani and a whole bunch of Vistani cast Hold Person on you, you're ruined. But as we can see here, these are not just free spells. If the target succeeds on the save, the Vistani is blinded until the end of the Vistani's next turn. So giving the Vistani all these powers is awesome, and it makes them feel like they are not just, simple travelers. They are that much more. Mind you, the Vistani aren't going to curse people just willy-nilly just because it's funny. They're only going to curse people that, do something worthwhile being cursed for. This could be something as simple as, saying something bad to the elder of the Vistani tribe. If your players threaten the Vistani with violence, then maybe some Vistani off on the side 30 feet away are going to go ahead and start casting some curses upon them, and they're not going to be any wiser. There's just so many things you can do with the Vistani, but of course, don't play them up as racist because, they're labeled as gypsies, but gypsies is offensive, and you shouldn't play into that stereotype. You should play them as their own people, and you should play them up as a people that are just like any other people around the world. So your players aren't going to be sitting around in the settlements for the entirety of the campaign. They will have to travel around the land, and for that we get these random encounters. Dangers abound in the land of Barovia. Check for a random encounter after every 30 minutes that the adventurers spent on the roads or in the wilderness. Don't check if they already had 2 encounters outdoors in the past 12 hours. So as we can see here, if the character's on a road, an encounter occurs on a roll of 18 or higher. And if they're out in the wilderness, then an encounter happens on a 15 or higher. So if you're traveling along the roads, it's more than likely that nothing happens, but of course every once in a while something does happen. It is far more likely that if your player is trying to cut in through the forest, then some encounters will happen, and typically those are not pleasant. And before we get to the actual encounters themselves, we get Strahd's spies. So all around the lands of Barovia, Strahd has many spies that do his bidding, many creatures, many peoples, and these people are trying to spy on the characters. This gives you the reason why Strahd knows so much about the party. It's not because you're metagaming, it's because your players are getting spied on. And even more so, if any character gets their hands on some of the creature's hair or skin, blood, fingernails, whatever the case may be, that gives Strahd the ability to efficiently scry on the characters. And this will allow him to totally know where the players are at any given point and will totally allow him to attack them whenever he desires. So in this module, we get 2 random encounter tables in the Lands of Barovia. We get a daytime random encounter and a nighttime random encounter. The interesting thing here is that they are a D12 plus a D8. This gives you a pretty decent variance, but of course, you could just be rolling a D20 or whatever. Mind you though, throughout the course of a campaign, if you spend a lot of time traveling and you always adhere to the rules and they always run into all these random encounters, I would strongly suggest that at some point throughout the course of your journeys, after having one encounter rolled up, you go ahead and sub out one of these results and put in something new. Basically what I would recommend is having like 5 extra things that you would go ahead and put in here, and you slot them in after you've rolled something. So we roll up an encounter, your players go up against 3d6 wolves. Let's go ahead and substitute that out and then put in something new, such as they find a killer tree. We also get a nighttime random encounter table here, and as you can see here, it is actually far deadlier than the daytime encounter. So basically, this is pushing onto your players, hey, don't travel at night, because traveling at night is scary. All these encounters have a bit of detail on how they occur and how they might change up. A bird example here being a corpse. You find a corpse, and it's not just going to be a corpse that just sits there, right? It could be a corpse that belonged to a wolf killed by spears and crossbow bolts. It could be the corpse belonging to a Barovian man, woman, or child. It could be the corpse belonging to one of the characters, because, that'd be funny. Of course, this is just an illusion. If moved, its flesh melts away and it's only a skeleton remains. So you can definitely have some fun jump scares and stuff like that in there. But as you can tell here, we get some good information on how to run all these little encounters. But once again, don't feel the need to run them purely as written. If your players already run into one grave, then go ahead and make the next grave far different. Make it unique. Make it so that your players aren't just hitting encounter 17 3 times in a row. For common features, Lands of Barovia here, we get listed doors, secret doors, locks, and webs. This is some good information to have. Mind you, more often than not, these things aren't really going to come up too often. Just always know in the back of your mind that if you want someone to rush through a reinforced door, let's say, they have to roll a DC 15 athletics check. If they want to find a secret door, then they have to make a DC 15 perception check. If they're trying to get through a lock, then it's a DC 15 dexterity check, etc., etc. And now on to the final part of Chapter 2, and it's going to take a tremendous amount of time, the areas of Barovia. So this is going to cover all of the locations scattered all around Barovia that has any significance at all. Mind you, as you scan through this, a lot of it is going to say things like, for example here, Village of Barovia. Chapter 3 describes the Village of Barovia and the gloomy folk who reside there. And Castle Ravenloft. Chapter 4 explores Castle Ravenloft, lair of the vampire Strahd von Zarovich. So as we'll see here, there's going to be some information that's left entirely up to their individual chapters, which is perfectly fine. But mind you, there is a lot of locations that are scattered around the Lands of Barovia. So let's go ahead and dive in on every single little location, shall we? In Area A, we have the old Svalich Road. This road is the entirety of the map, essentially. This thing runs all the way up and down all along the roads, leading from east to west. So it states here that if characters are walking along the road, they arrive at Area B after 5 hours. This is if you are using a hook that gets your players from the lands of wherever they were from into the mist of Barovia, and they are going down the old Svalich Road, and you want to get them to the village of Barovia. Mind you, you don't have to have your players show up on the old Svalich Road. They could appear anywhere on the map. The suggestion about this campaign is that you should have your players start on the east side of the map here, and then they go to Village of Barovia and traverse all around. But there is a lot of DMs who decide to not do that. There is some DMs who plop their players into different parts of this map, and that is perfectly fine. That is your prerogative. Mind you, you have to sort of consider the implications of the entire story where you drop your players first, because that is going to really set them up for the future. And how are they going to get from all these different settlements and interact with all these story beats? It is by using this old Svalich Road here. In Area B, we have the Gates of Barovia, and my god, is this art just fantastic. Look at that. Imagine you're just walking down this road and you just see these monumental statues, their heads toppled, and these gates that swing wide in front of you. Absolutely incredible. Share this art, please. So the thing about the Gates of Barovia is, once again, this is if your players are coming here from the east side of the map. And what it states here is that if characters are traveling on foot, the gates swing open as they approach, screeching as the hinges move. And the gates close behind once they pass their way through. And they don't open again from the inside. Once your players try and go to the gate again, the gate is going to always be closed for them, signifying essentially that they are trapped within these lands. Area C, the Svalich Woods. This is the woods that, once again, you're going to be coming through if you're coming from this side of the map. But this gives a really good story beat. We have this little incident that says you catch the scent of death on the air. And once you do so, you look around and find a human corpse half buried in the underbrush about 15 feet from the road. This dead man is named Delvin Olensky, and he was trying to escape Barovia, and he has a letter clutched in his hands, and he's basically trying to send out a message to anyone saying, hey, we're in trouble, we need help. If your players linger around these woods too long, then a pack of 5 direwolves arrive and attack. If the characters are trying to leave Barovia, these direwolves are joined by a pack of 20 wolves. The wolves and the direwolves stop their attack if the characters return to the road and head toward the village of Barovia. So the thing is typically you run this campaign, starting off anywhere between levels 1, 2, and 3, around there-ish. A group of 5 direwolves and 20 wolves will mop the floor with any level 1, 2, and 3 group, absolutely. So hopefully you play this up as more of a roleplay encounter of you start to see these massive wolves encroaching on the party and you realize that you need to get out of there, and hopefully they run away. Area D, we have the River Ivlis. This river flows for a pretty decent amount of time. It flows out of Barovia, and eventually it goes all the way over to the Tser Falls and falls into, of course, a pool over there. The only information we really get is the river is roughly 50 feet wide, with a depth ranging from 5 to 10 feet. So hopefully no one drowns in this thing, because it's not that big of a deal. In Area F, we have the River Ivlis Crossroads. It actually states here that you check for a random encounter whenever the characters reach Area F, meaning this is like outside of the 30 minutes of whenever you roll for an encounter, which could be interesting because having an encounter here, depending on what it is, has a lot of roleplay implications. It is here where they're going to be able to see a sign, and one of them points to the Tser Falls in the north, and the last one points to Ravenloft / Svalich. So your players will be able to follow whichever one they desire. If they've been told that there's a Vistani camp near the Tser Falls, they'll probably go there. But if they haven't, and they just want to get to the next town, and they heard the next town was Svalich, they're probably just going to go ahead and follow the Svalich Road. Mind you, both of these roads end up in the same place, as we can see here. But something I haven't talked about yet, and I'll get to it more once we actually get to talking about the actual campaign, is the fact that if you show this map to your players, they won't be able to see all this stuff. So as we can see here, if we get rid of all the GM layer stuff, they'll only be able to see these roads. And mind you, this is only if you're showing this map off to your players. I would say that if your players don't actually have a map of the land, then maybe you don't actually show off this map at all, really. Maybe you just describe where they're going and either have a cartographer in the party go ahead and draw out their own map, or just say, hey, you know, these woods all look the same if you don't have anybody that's willing to draw out a map. There isn't only the signpost here at the crossroads, there is also a gallows and there's also a graveyard. We actually get this really cool event with the gallows, and once your characters are leaving the area, they hear a creaking noise behind them, and if they turn around, they'll be able to see a body now dangling in the breeze of this gallows that wasn't there before. And once they arrive, one random character sees this character and sees that they themselves are hanging from the gallows. So this is kind of creepy. You know, this could be foreshadowing for future events, or it could just be, you know, some creepy set piece. In Area G, we have the Tser Falls Encampment. This is probably one of the more fleshed out areas that isn't part of any chapter outside of Chapter 2 here, and it actually gets its own little map. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, shall we? So this is the Tser Falls Encampment. The reason why your players might show up here is because, one, this was one of the story hooks to get them in the Lands of Barovia, or two, your players have heard of Vistani nearby and want to go ahead and check it out, either because they just want to check out these Vistani, or because they've been told about Madame Ava and can potentially get their fortunes told here. The Vistani of this camp are in fact in league with Strahd. However, they don't attack the party because they don't need to. Why would they? They are going to go ahead and just invite the party over for a drink and for merriment, and the party can go ahead and hop along with them. Regardless of how they got there, the Vistani are going to go ahead and recommend that they meet with Madame Ava because Madame Ava can read their fortunes. In addition, if any of your players hang around the campfire for a little while, the Vistani are going to recount the tale of a mighty wizard that came to this land over a year ago and rallied the people and fought Strahd, and how the people lost, and how this Vistani with his own eyes saw this wizard get cast down from the castle. This is foreshadowing Mordenkainen, who came to these lands a year ago and did all those things, and he lost. But he did not die. He actually somehow survived and is now literally crazy and hanging around the mountains, and we'll get to that at Mount Baratok. Once your players go ahead and meet up with Madame Ava, she will go ahead and do her thing. She's going to go ahead and talk to the players and say, hey, you know, I can go ahead and read your fortunes for you, and I can go ahead and try and give you as much help and information as possible. Madame Ava will go ahead and read her fortunes to the party. However, she is not going to help the players out in any significant way. She's simply going to tell them their fortunes. She's, of course, in league with Strahd, but she doesn't want to anger him, and she is going to do whatever Strahd asks her to do. So Madame Ava's camp can be played out a lot of different ways. There's a lot of unique things you can do with the fortune reading, of course. There's, of course, a lot of fun things you can do with the Vistani located around here. And the fact that this can be your group's first introduction to the wilderness. This can be your group's first introduction to the outside world. And they can see and they can hear and smell and, you know, just take in the world around them. And they will truly know that they are no longer in Kansas. This is, of course, a prime opportunity for some of Strahd's servants to go ahead and snatch up some hair or some skin or some blood from the player characters, because if the PCs think that these guys are up swell and joyful and stuff, and lo and behold, you know, they take a pinch of hair here or there, especially if your players decide to stay here for the night, then Strahd's gonna already be able to scry on all these people easy peasy. This is a location that doesn't get that much text, but there is certainly a lot of things that can happen here, especially the roleplay implications of when your players finally receive their card reading, then they're going to sit there and question, what do these mean? We get these cryptic messages, but Madame Ava isn't going to help them with the cryptic messages. None of the Vistani here are going to help with the cryptic messages. So they're going to have to be stewing on that, as well as, you know, interacting with all these people and possibly watching behind their backs. In Area 8, we have the Tser Falls, and it's here where your players will cross a bridge easy peasy, and we get some really good information on what your players will be able to see. And I'm sure if you hop online real quick, you'll be able to find some excellent art here, especially James' RPG art. Fantastic stuff. A link to James' Instagram will be in the description down below, because you should totally use his art for a lot of things in Curse of Strahd and other modules. But as we can see here, so we get good information on what your players will be able to see, and we can also see that the chasm's walls are slippery and sheer, and if anybody essentially falls into the chasm, then they're kind of screwed. But other than that, not really much more to this location. In Area I, we have the Black Carriage. So your players will be able to walk through here no problem, and the first time they do walk through here, they're not going to really see anything. But once Strahd has invited the party to dinner, once they arrive to this location, they will see that parked at the road, there will be a large black carriage drawn by 2 black horses. The horses snort puffs of steamy breath into the chilly mountain air. The side doors of the carriage swing wide open for the players. This is basically Strahd extending a little invitation so they don't have to basically march up this long steep hill. They can just go ahead and hop on a cart. And this is not a trap. This is just, you know, a nice way for Strahd to get players to the castle a little bit quicker. Area J, the gates of Ravenloft. This is what your players are going to find once they make their way up this winding cliffside and approach the castle. We get some really good information here about what they'll be able to see and the lower drawbridge and all that fun stuff. What's really funny here is it states that the drawbridge extends out and it appears to be sturdy, and if the horse-drawn carriage goes across this thing, there's no issue. But each time a creature other than Strahd makes their way onto this bridge, there is a 5% chance that one of the boards breaks under it, and they have to make a DC 10 dexterity saving throw. If they fail, they fall 1,000 feet below, and presumably to their death. If a companion is within 5 feet of the creature and reaches out to grab it, the creature has advantage on the saving throw. Which, you know, is very nice, of course. A DC 10 dexterity saving throw, and if you have advantage, that's not too hard. But of course, I've seen many people fail easy things, and that is just a surefire way to have someone die. That is definitely a holdover from old school D&D, especially because it's using a D100 system. But, you know, it's pretty funny nonetheless. We also get mention here of a patch of green slime. There's a patch of green slime that is resting on the portcullis to the entry tunnel. And what it states is, it doesn't do anything once the players pass through. But if they make their way out of Castle Ravenloft, then it's going to go ahead and try and fall on whoever makes their way through. So something important to note here, as your players are making their way through the Lands of Barovia, they'll also find an additional one of these large gates of Barovia, which is located right here past the intersection. And you can go ahead and play up that cool art style and awesome theme as well of these gates opening up for the players. Area L, Lake Zarovich. Basically, this is just a large lake which is located right next to the town of Vistani. And we actually get some cool information here about the first time your players arrive to Lake Zarovich, they're going to be able to see a rowboat, and this rowboat out in the middle of the lake actually has a person inside of it. His name is Bluto, and Bluto is a dick. Bluto is a destitute drunkard, and he just goes out to this lake and fishes all the time, but he is relatively unlucky, and he's just been having a terrible time, and he thinks that the best way that he can go ahead and secure his luck, and he decides to take a little girl named Arabelle, who is in fact a Vistani, and he is going to go ahead and take her and throw her into the lake. If your players encounter this guy, he's not going to respond to them, he's not really going to pay any attention to the characters at all, and after a few minutes of trying to fish, he's just going to go ahead and take the girl Arabelle, throw her out, and try and kill her. So if your characters are watching this all go down and they just see a burlap sack just thrown out into the water, they're probably going to think something's fishy here. And in which case they can go ahead and make a DC 15 athletics check if they are swimming, but only a DC 10 if they are in a rowboat, and find Arabelle before she drowns. If they save her, she'll tell all about how she belongs to the Vistani that are located just outside of Vallaki, and she is certain that her father, Luvash, will totally reward the players should they return her to the Vistani camp. What's interesting about her is that she is a descendant of Madame Ava with the blood of Barovian royalty in her veins. Arabelle is unaware of her connection to Strahd. She acts more like an adult than a child. Despite her recent misadventures, she believes that a great destiny awaits her. And it certainly could be, because she's in fact one of the many allies that your players could make through the tarot card reading. In Area M, we have the Mad Mage of Mount Baratok. So Mordenkainen, who got thrown off the castle Ravenloft oh so long ago, he's gone crazy and he's now floating around in these woods and in these mountains specifically, and he just is crazy. Every once in a while, he casts the lightning bolt into the river, but more often than not, he just polymorphs himself and runs around the place and will retreat into his magnificent mansion. So this guy is crazy, and unfortunately, there's not too much beyond magical means that your players can do to help this guy. He needs greater restoration cast upon him, and that is really bad because lower level parties don't have the capabilities of doing so. You need to have a higher level party in order to cast Greater Restoration, unless you allow some DM fiat, of course. But once Greater Restoration is actually cast upon this guy, he can go ahead and reveal all the information he has. He's going to tell all about his backstory and all of the friends he has and all the various planes that he's interacted with. But the important thing here is the fact that this guy's stat block is actually really gross. This guy is an Archmage after all. So you don't want this guy joining the party for any reason, because he would overshadow the party. And even more so, if he is your destined ally, which he certainly well could be, he'll state that he will only join the party once they are going to make that final assault. So you're not going to have the Mad Mage, Mordenkainen, joining the party throughout the course of their adventure. He is only going to join them for the grand finale. In Area P, we have the Luna River Crossroads, and this is a 4-way intersection, and they'll be able to see that this leads 4 different ways, of course. We have signs that state they lead to Kresk and Solenka Pass, Lake Baratok, Vallaki and Ravenloft, and to Berez. And each of these locations, of course, are just scattered completely all over the place and can certainly lead your players to a whole bunch of different locations. In Area R, we have the Raven River Crossroads. And once again, this is just pointing to more directions where your players could be going to. We have a location that shows us to Kresk, to Vallaki, and also very important is the Wizard of Wines. And just like that, that is Chapter 2. We get a lot of information about the people of this land. We get a lot of information about some of the locations that are not located in any of these specific chapters. But of course, the main bulk of this adventure comes from these chapters. These chapters are going to be super in-depth. These chapters are going to provide lots of story beats, lots of NPCs, lots of locations to delve into. And oh my goodness, is it going to be absolutely riveting stuff. There is so many ways you can handle this adventure, and this is just the beginning. These first 2 chapters were just a mere tease into what your players are going to be delving into. And I cannot wait to start ramping up my content on this stuff because my goodness is this book fascinating. Chapter 2 is definitely the chapter which you kind of want to thumb back to every once in a while and recap on some things that you're forgetting or missing. But for the most part is going to be kind of not ever present. Your players aren't dealing with the Barovians all the time. They're not dealing with Vistani all the time. They're not dealing with all the world around them. Your players, throughout the course of this module, will have a lot of sessions where they might just be out in the wilderness doing nothing. They might be on one particular quest and might not be interacting with the world around them. So with that in mind, keep all this information to consider, all of the altercations to magic, all the peoples of this lands, and all of the areas around it. And I'm sure that you will be well prepared for anything that you are going to throw at your players. But that's going to do it for me. Go ahead and tell me, how are you going to get your players around this world? Where are you going to even start your players? The book obviously suggests that you start in Area A over here, but the thing is they don't need to start over there. You could just plump them in the middle of the road somewhere and you can say, hey, you can go either one way or another. Where do you go? And they decide their fortunes. Maybe you start them all the way up here by Kresk, and Kresk is the first settlement that they are introduced with. Maybe you just start them in the middle of the woods and say, hey, it's a foraging adventure, go. Sky's the limit with this one. How are you going to handle the Barovians? Are they just going to be this drab, quiet people that don't interact with the party at all? Or your players are going to get a lot more involved in the Barovians' lives? Are they going to try and warm themselves up to the Barovians? And are they going to be able to even be successful? How are you going to handle the Vistani? They can certainly add a lot to this game. They can be antagonistic, they can be friendly, they can be subversive, they can do so many different things, and they're totally awesome to use. I want to hear all this stuff because I love this module. This module is fantastic. It was my second played module ever of D&D, and I absolutely love it. The next location in the series we'll be diving into is the village of Barovia, because that is a great starter location, and there's a lot of great story hooks and beats to play off of from there. And it's that chapter where you are going to truly get a sense for how this module is going to go, how your players are going to interact with the world, and it's going to finally start giving us some quests on what to do once we actually arrive in the land of Barovia. That is going to do it for me. Thank you all for watching. And go ahead and subscribe, because I've noticed that only 30% of my viewers are subscribed. Ugh, breaks my heart. So go ahead and subscribe if you're not subscribed. But that is going to do it for me. Thank you all for watching, and have a good time.